May we start?
I want to get your opinion on something.
To the bigger picture. Now it's time.
From B Media Production, this is Podcasting Essentials.
Hi, and welcome to Episode 8, Season 3. I'm Nick Schildberger, Managing Director of B Media Production. It's award season in the world of podcasting, with our own Australian Podcast Awards, the Webby Awards and British Podcast Awards all run and won in recent weeks. So this episode, we look at what it takes to be a successful podcast. And who better to start the conversation than esteemed judge at the International Webby Awards, my co-host Chris Ashmore.
G'day, Nick. That's a nice word. Esteemed. That's fantastic. Now, before we get into that, very happy to announce a new member of the B Media Production team, new producer, Nicole Goodman.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here with you guys.
Great to have you aboard. We're excited as well.
Yes, it's an exciting time.
It is. Well, tell us a bit about yourself. As a producer, you won a podcast award last year, Australian Podcast Award.
I did. Very unexpectedly, and for my podcast, Dating Upside Down. Yeah, had no idea, entered it quite late and went along, and lo and behold, a few people thought it was all right. So,
not unexpected, I think.
I didn't really think too much about it. But yeah, won Best Newcomer, which was a really kind of good boost to keep going. And there's been a bit of a hiatus, but I am going back to it soon. So it was amazing. It was awesome.
Fantastic. Now, look, we've got a bit of a dilemma here.
Yes.
Now, you like to be known as Nick. Now, we've got another Nick.
I know.
So you can't take that. What are we going to do?
It's a problem, I know. You could be Nick S and I'm Nick G, Nicky G.
Nick G, Nicky G.
Nicky G, my DJ name, Nicky G.
I think our audience will tell the difference between my voice and your voice, but hey, why not
Probably.
Nicky G? Let's go with that.
Nicky G.
Nicky G's in the house.
Into house. Some variation. Yeah, cool.
Now, before we get to the Webby Awards, quick announcement. We've launched another podcast since we were last in the studio for realestate.com.au called Off the Plan. It's for their developer division, and the first episode is their chief innovator, what a great title, Nigel Dalton, who explains the potential that AI can unlock in the property development industry. So if you want to have a listen, it's in our show notes.
Fantastic.
Right.
Well, speaking of announcements, Nick, the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival podcast that we produced, just since the last episode, it's been featured in Apple Podcasts and iTunes, which is fantastic, of course, to get the word out. I think the increase in listenership has just gone through the roof because of that. So it is kind of good to get it featured on Apple.
It is. It's always nice to see a podcast that we're working on up in lights on Apple Podcasts. So, yeah, great work by the team who produced it here, and great work by, obviously, Melbourne Food and Wine to do nice artwork and get great speakers in the room. It all came together to make a great podcast.
I think in a future episode, perhaps we can talk about how we get that up on the charts. I think it's good to know.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Now, the International Webby Awards were announced, as with the British Awards and the Aussie Awards recently, but the Webby Awards, it's 23 years of the awards, and it's the first year with a podcast as a category, and there were 18 categories within the category, but I don't want to go on too much about it. But there's a few ones to look out for. Branded podcasts, Nike won with Trained. It's a podcast that is for trainers, but also designed to let the world listen in on Nike's most cutting-edge conversations around the future of fitness. I've just copied and pasted that, so it sounded very corporate. Another one to look out for is The Source for McDonald's, and I've written an article about this, I think, last year. Fantastic, innovative content marketing piece, advertising piece, really well done. The other finalists for the People's Choice Awards, one of them was The Journey, for Dutch Airlines KLM. Next episode, a bit of a surprise, I'll be interviewing the producer of that podcast all the way in Amsterdam. So either a late night or an early morning chat.
Speaking Dutch, I hope.
Double Dutch?
Double
yes.
Dutch.
And the best business podcast, and Nick, you'll be happy about this, is Business Wars.
I do love Business Wars. It's one of my favourite podcasts. I love the short 6 episodes on each battle. Is really good, really great stories. Never really sure how much of it's the real truth when they're trying to, tell conversations that happened in boardrooms decades ago. But it's an interesting podcast because it's not interview-based. It's basically just the host reading a book. So it's more of an audio book than a podcast, but they've promoted it really well. Good production qualities, engaging stories, and so a deserved winner.
Yeah, and for some people that might think it doesn't really fall into the podcast category, I'd point you to something like My Dad Wrote a Porno, which is exactly that. 3 people reading from a book that one of the presenters' father has written over the years, and extremely popular podcast. They're doing huge world tours at the moment. I mean, the content's written for them. It's kind of really annoying that, they're just writing on his dad's crazy porno vibes. But it's excellent and really funny. But it's that idea of, content already being there and someone just reading it.
Yeah, but it's engaging.
Very engaging.
Done well, high production qualities, and it has done extremely well.
Yes, so there you go.
It's not just reading a book, though.
No, it's not.
They banter about the different sentences that the idiot writes about.
They do. I mean, and the content is great. It's very much worthy of all its accolades. I mean, a podcast is audio in the cloud, accessible from the cloud. And whatever that audio is, I guess, is whatever it is.
One episode can be a podcast, can't
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, moving on to the Australian Podcast Awards, which I attended up in Sydney a few weeks ago. The winner of a new award this year, the Podcast of the Year, was Wrong Skin by The Age. It also won Best True Crime. So hopefully, I'm kind of hoping that maybe in 2020, something other than true crime will be the top of the charts. But it was a good podcast. I listened to it on a drive back from Albury-Wodonga on the weekend, listened to the whole thing, beginning to end. And the fact I got through the whole thing means it must have been pretty good.
25 minutes each episode. 5 episodes?
6 episodes.
Right. Wouldn't want to be much longer?
No, I think you could tell Richard Baker, the producer, being a journalist, had used his craft to go back and script and edit and mould the episodes into a duration that I think is about right, about that 25 minutes. And the story arc across the series had a beginning, middle and end, which I think is also important, especially in true crime where you don't quite know when you set off where you're going to finish because you're trying to solve a crime. I think there are podcasts, other true crime podcasts like Up and Vanished in the US, which I got a little bit sucked into an early season, but it started to drive me crazy because he even said, I'm doing 6 episodes. And then he said, hang on, I'm now doing 12. And then it became fortnightly. And then he was doing 2 a week. And it was like, hang on, you're just throwing so much content out there that it's too much.
Too much.
So I did like the fact that Wrong Skin was a beginning, middle and end. Obviously, if more things happen through the investigation, he can revisit it. But at the moment, it's that's the end of the series. There were some other great podcasts that won. I won't go through them all because there were probably too many.
So 18 categories.
Something like that. Probably too many. But Dave Gertler did a great job of keeping the night flowing, which was terrific.
Yeah, he's great.
But the ABC, congratulations to them for winning, I think, 7 awards. We've said before they produce great content and that's being shown through the awards. But on the whole, I think, and being a judge of the awards this year, there's an increase in quality across the board and better podcasts are winning, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, good thing for the whole category, for the whole medium. It's great.
Now, Chris, you drew my attention to an article in The Guardian by Miranda Sawyer, which we want to discuss today. It's about a popular podcast doing the rounds at the moment called 13 Minutes to the Moon, produced by the BBC's World Service, and being popular and being promoted actually at the moment by Apple Podcasts. It's getting, I would assume, a lot of downloads, a lot of interest. But this article had a little bit of a different angle. Yeah,
the writer was quite scathing of what's happening at the BBC with their podcasts. Now, this podcast is also in the charts, in the Australian charts, on Apple Podcasts. I've listened to a couple of episodes and it is quite good, but I can see what she means by putting too much into it and not treating the listener with respect and with intelligence. And a lot of podcasts do that, I think.
Well, she referred to it as extraneous information stymied the story.
And she means things like, and this really pricked up my ears when the narrator was talking about the so-called Cold War. Well, we know what the Cold War was, and it's little things like that where it just makes you think, who has somebody been living in a cave for decades? They don't know their history.
It's very strange.
And it's regurgitating bits of audio. There's a particular overuse of President Kennedy's announcement that the Americans choose to go to the moon. Throughout the first episode, it becomes annoying. So I think the point is that it's okay to edit some stuff out. You don't have to leave everything in there. And if you're narrating something, and a lot of podcast narrative style does this, where they state the bleeding obvious, and the other thing is that the journalist or the narrator gives their point of view. I don't care to hear your point of view. Just tell the story and I'll make up my own mind. And I don't know where that comes from, and maybe I'm getting older or it's infiltrating a lot of journalism anyway. But a particular point I think is Serial. Great series, of course, one of the most downloaded in history. But I think I'm finding by the third series that Sarah Koenig is giving her point of view too much, and it's just ruining the enjoyment of the podcast. I think you need to just take a step back and treat your audience with a bit of respect.
It's interesting. I was listening to ABC News this morning. As is my wont, I've turned to talk back, getting old, and listening to Patricia Karvelas. And she actually got a text message from someone who said, I'm tired of you sitting on the fence, something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, I'm tired of you sitting on the fence. Can you just pick a side or pick a point of view? And anyone who listens to Patricia Karvelas knows she is not backwards and coming forwards. She's very upfront with what she thinks. And she actually said, this is a first. I'm going to let the editorial team know that someone actually thinks I'm not putting my point of view forward. And she said, I'm very well aware of what my point of view on a lot of these topics is, and it's not for major public consumption. I'm interested in what you're talking about. So that was an interesting flip side to that, where she's interested in trying to, pull her point of view back, which is going back to traditional journalism, I think. But there is a blurring now where celebrated journalists are interested, or the public's interested in hearing, what their point of view on certain topics are, which is interesting.
Well, that's right. And one thing that the author Miranda Sawyer wrote in this particular article is that she recommends perhaps whoever's producing these podcast shows for the BBC have a listen to some great podcasts out there and understand that, cut out that extraneous chatter and don't hold the hands of the people listening to it. But the thing is with if you remove the BBC and maybe look at a lot of podcasts that are out there, where do they get their inspiration, or what do they think is a good podcast? There are so many podcasts out there with a couple of people in front of a microphone just going on for an hour or an hour and a half. They think that's what they've got to replicate. But audio can be anything. It can be a 4-minute thing for kids like Chompers. You've got to work out yourself what your audience wants and then take out everything that doesn't fit for them.
What I would suggest to brands out there that are looking at starting a podcast is don't just copy other podcasts. Exactly what Chris was saying. Think about your audience.
Yep.
Podcasting can be anything. And it's been around for 15 years.
Yep.
But because in the last few years it's become really popular, podcasters tend to copy other podcasts that have been popular. And I don't think that is necessarily moving the bar higher and higher.
That's right. And I think podcasting is the democratization of audio, I feel. Everyone's in there. It's accessible. It's relatively cheap if you want to just put out something quick and easy. And everyone's going out there having their say. And because it's kind of new and people are maybe a bit nervous and scared, they are looking for, well, what are the big boys doing? What are the other people doing? And just to try and get something out there. But I think once it kind of calms down, people will find their way and it'll kind of settle a little bit perhaps.
One last thing I want to discuss that's been on my mind for quite a while is the use of trailers in podcasting. And I'm going to refer to another blog, one of my favourites again, the boys at Pacific Content. Dan Meisner wrote a blog, actually quite a while ago now, about how trailers can and should be used. And I think most people listening to this probably have seen a trailer for a podcast series about to launch. That's one way to use a trailer, but there are actually other ways you can use trailers. Dan talked about using a trailer as a placeholder when you're trying to get your podcast approved by Apple Podcasts. If you have a launch date set in stone that you want to launch your podcast, you have to get it approved by Apple first. And you don't know how long that process is going to take. So we did this with Melbourne Food and Wine, actually. We produced a short trailer, uploaded it to Apple Podcasts to get it approved. We've actually since removed that trailer because we've changed the music and a few different things. But it allowed us to get the podcast approved so that we could then launch episode 1 on the day at the time we wanted to. Now, we probably should go back and recreate a trailer, because an evergreen trailer as an introduction to a podcast series, doesn't matter how long the podcast has been in existence, could be the first piece of audio that a prospective listener chooses to click on first. And people are busy. It gives them, 1 or 2 minutes introduction to what your podcast is about. I mean, it's a great thing to have there for new listeners to discover you.
I have a perfect example. 7am, podcast by Maury Schwartz company that publishes the Saturday paper. They launched theirs with a trailer. It was there for 3 or 4 weeks, the trailer, before, I think the 27th of May, it was launched, the proper episode 1, which I think was great. It gave 3 weeks of promotion time where you could pop that into your app and subscribe to it. So when it was ready, it was there.
And another reason they did that, I presume, is because they built up their launch date. They were talking about their launch date for that 3-week, whatever it was, runway. They then would have done a heap of PR around that date to get maximum amount of downloads. And the reason I'm explaining this is because it's one of the things that Apple looks at is sudden growth in subscribers to a podcast. Yep. And it's not surprising that 7am is also currently featured by Apple Podcasts.
It's a really smart strategy. Yep.
Trailers can also be used for new seasons. So you can have more than one trailer. If you can have a small break between seasons, drop in a trailer for the new season. It gives people who have subscribed to your podcast another reason to be updated and to go back to your podcast. And for new listeners that are coming into a podcast potentially 2 or 3 seasons in, they may have been told by a colleague, you've got to listen to this podcast. Having a trailer for that new season gives them that, again, that first place to quickly go have a short listen to see whether there's enough there to engage them to continue listening. And there's no reason why you can't have multiple trailers. An evergreen trailer that sits at the start of your series, new season trailers, and you can go back and update them as well. Things change. I mean, this podcast has changed name, for example. We will be podcasting, now we're podcasting essentials.
That's an important point between seasons, and we've found ourselves that after the end of, say, Season 2, there's a significant drop-off of subscribers, and to get them back again in Season 3 takes quite a while. So to have a trailer in there just to let people know we're still here, I think is very important.
Yeah, actually on that point, Chris, I think one of the issues with losing an audience between seasons, there's 2 things going on. One is people move on to other podcasts because you can only listen to a certain amount of content in a week or in a period of time. But the other thing is that some podcast apps will, if there's no activity, if you're not listening to anything, the app will see that inactivity as you not wanting to subscribe anymore and in some cases will stop your subscription. Then the next season launches and you don't realise, but you're not getting pushed that next episode. And you can go into the settings and change that manually, but there'd be a lot of people out there that don't know that. And they don't even realise that a new season's launched, and for producers, you've lost some of your audience. Well, I think that's all we have time for this episode of Podcasting Essentials. Welcome again, Nikki G.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
And we look forward to hearing more about the projects you'll be working on with us.
Absolutely.
And of course, for more about us and how we can help you use audio content to build engagement, you can go to be.com.au. From all of us at B Media Production, thanks so much for listening.